Hi, Rob. First of all, thanks for joining us on this. We're pre-recording this because of a little time zone difference, but I want to introduce Rob Cowart to everybody. First of all, I am a huge fan of yours, but specifically your products. I've personally used Elastiflow, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. So I have a little bit of hands-on experience, but I'm missing a couple of elements on how this came to be. So I'd love to start off by hearing a little bit about you, give us an intro to your background, and then a little bit of intro to Elastiflow and how this came to be.
Okay, great. Well, first off, let me just say thanks for the few kind words. Always good to talk to users of the solution. And of course, always good to hear when people appreciate the thing that you've poured so much time into. It's kind of an interesting story. I guess myself, I would probably go back somewhere around the mid to late 90s. I was actually got started in software working around like backup software, all kinds of hierarchical storage management and those type of things. I was working at Seagate Software, and they had bought a company called NetLabs, which had this product Nerve Center that did S&MP polling and event correlation type of things. And that was really my transition into network management. Spent some time working at Micromuse. That was really a great organization I worked for. I still miss them. I have a great relationship with that whole team still. And there had done some of my first community kind of focused projects around stuff I did with S&MP traps and those type of data sources. And then we got bought by IBM, hung out there for a while, got my kids through school, and then set out for another part of my career, ended up working at Sev1 that had a performance management solution. And that really began the transition to what today is Elastiflow and a lot of other projects that I've been involved in. And that was definitely around 2013, I would say. I distinctly remember I was in Hong Kong doing some projects for Telstra Global, and they would come over and say, hey, we're playing around with this big data lake thing, and we just like a feed of your data, so we have some stuff to play around with. And then you kind of fast forward 3 years later, and we literally heard people saying, hey, we're buying you guys for collection, and that's it. And then we're putting all of our data in this other data platform for analytics and visualization and what have you. And so when you hear the story enough, you start to think, man, something's really changing here in the market. And if I want to continue to be relevant, I better figure out what it is and see where the value is, and perhaps get a little more involved there myself. So in the course of playing around with that, one of the first projects I made was this little tool to collect some NetFlow data that I really just made for myself. And this is going back about 3.5 years ago now. And I made that first commit onto that GitHub project of Elastiflow. And since then, I can distinctly remember I was actually going to be talking in an event in Switzerland, and my wife had traveled with me, and we're sitting there in the hotel room, and I'm looking at my phone going like, man, I got like 23 stars in the last day and a half. And just thinking like, interesting. Well, I wonder what happened there. And it just kind of started taking off. And I think we're approaching about 2,000 stars in the repository. I at one point realized the logo that is on the dashboard used to be served off my web server. I one time realized, oh man, I can look at my web logs and understand a lot of organizations that are using it. And it turned out to be some fairly large ones and fairly significant organizations. That's where I really started to realize the spread. I estimate now the solution probably has somewhere between 30 to 35,000 users around the world, including some relatively big names. And it's just kind of taken off. It still kind of blows my mind to this day. I mean, essentially that solution's also helped pay my bills for a number of years now with various types of projects and things. And it's really also reached a point now today where it's ready to transition, I think, into that next phase. And I'll share a little bit about that as we go through the conversation. So.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's so important. You kind of talked about a little bit is for a very long time. And even today, everyone cares about the data. Everyone wants to collect all the data. right? But we as humans aren't good at looking at data. We're not good at looking at raw data. And that's one of the things why I love Elastiflow so much is we're human beings, we're animals, we're visual. We operate entirely on our senses. And that's one of the things about your product is you have some of the prettiest dashboards to visualize network data, specifically network data. And in fact, a lot of the things that I did on last week's stream, that I did with Graylog, I actually, based and was influenced by a lot of the things that you've done in Elastiflow. So having that visualization is such a key piece for humans to understand data. And I think you've done a beautiful job in doing that with your projects.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I oftentimes say in these projects, though, that when I think about the time that goes into creating such a thing, probably 3% is the data store. I mean, this is my personal opinion. People could debate this or not, but I kind of feel like data stores are a commodity now. You want a search engine, get Splunk, get Elastic. You want a document store, get MongoDB. You want a time series database, you got TimescaleDB or Influx. It's kind of like they're all out there, right? But a database on its own doesn't provide insight or information. And so then you got the analytics part, whether it's visual or machine-driven analytics. That's probably 7% of the work of those type of projects. And then you have, though, to make all of that work, it's where's the data? How do I get it? How do I parse it, transform it, enrich it, and turn it into something? I talk a lot about, when I talk about what the real difference of Elastiflow is, one of the things I talk about is this translation from machine type information to human consumable information. Some of us in the network world, we know that, IP protocol 6 is TCP and 17 is UDP, but do you know what 132 is?
Wait. No, I don't. I'm thinking. Okay, thank you.
But the point being is, like, even those of us that are in it every day cannot keep all of this stuff in our head. And so it's not enough to just do some raw parsing of the information and throw it in a data store. You do have to pay a lot of attention to understanding what's the use case, how do people want to use this, and then how do I transform that into a form that allows me to present them that context in an easy to understand way. So the focus on the user experience, is still really important regardless of the technology. So
I mean, that's everything. I mean, like, at the end of the day, that's everything. I mean, so like when you put out those ratios, that feels right to me, because if it was as simple as having the data or storing the data, we would all just be using log collection. Like, I think that's where we all start, right? It's just logs. But then you start realizing that, oh, wait a minute, when I'm collecting logs from this many devices, or, looking at logs for all these different services, it just becomes non-consumable. And so spending time and parsing that data is the key part. It is what makes a tool valuable or not, because collecting the data, like you said, like, databases have been around for a long time. We can drop data wherever we want to. Right. So it is, I mean, so I guess I kind of used to dismiss interfaces, right? Like, the data is what's important. I think the longer I do this, the more I recognize how important it is for the representation of the data. Like, what is it that you see? Are you actually seeing stuff that gives you actionable data? Are you actually seeing something that gives you something that you can, it's not just consume and understand, but does it tell you what needs to be done? That's why where a tool like yours, steps in and really does help in giving us a solid visualization of what is happening, and then how we might need to adjust to whatever's going on.
So Rob, without any further ado, I want you to dive in and give us a demo. Are there any cool dashboards? Are there any cool functionality? Are there any cool processes that you'd like to start off with before we get to like the behind the scenes and the deep dive?
Sure. So what I have over here is I have the Elastiflow dashboards. This right here at the beginning is the overview. Now, this is based on the Elastic Stack, and which is a search engine. So one of the real keys to understanding how to best use this is to think about exploration of my data. So I'm looking for those conditions of interest out of the information that's presented to me. And because it's a search engine, the way that you tend to navigate and drill down is by by selecting things to filter on. And so I tried to start right at the beginning to give a bit of an overview, and also to then allow you to already begin to start drilling down into some potential things that might be of interest. Like if we look at these two things over on the right-hand side, one of the things that I do is I actually scrape a bunch of external open source intelligence sources. Again, normalize that data into some common taxonomy to tag public IP addresses about their reputation, and that allows you to hear just by saying, okay, there's a lot of things that are known for accessing SSH or doing brute force type stuff, and then I have up here at the top TCP flags, and you might say, well, why do I really care about TCP flags? Well, they can be really interesting, like. When I establish that three-way handshake in TCP, that's where I get a SYN. So if I want to know maybe about reconnaissance activity, I might just go ahead and click right away on that SYN, and that's going to set this filter up here. And maybe we'll click another one. So maybe I don't want things that are ACT, because after the SYN comes an ACT, so I can exclude that. And now I can start to look at things that, where I want to drill in, like, maybe I want to look at reconnaissance of things that weren't necessarily connected, or I do want to know about things that I believe there was a good connection, then I can leave that ACT flag in there. Fortunately, a lot of the bad reputations dropped away when I added that ACT, and I'm looking at looking more only at the established type things. But I could potentially even look at, I don't know, let's just grab a bot here. This is kind of live data, so I'm never quite 100% sure what I'm going to see. But here we can see, again, there were a number of things. Okay, these look like some type of bots, search engine crawlers, or what have you, which explains the reputation of bot and why those connections were actually established. This happens to be a web server that I happen to have, so that's probably not a big surprise there. I'm not too concerned about those type of things. But what I might be more concerned about would say, for example, that I start looking at ACT things that have actually reached inside my environment, and maybe like a database connection type of stuff that could be far more concerning if I was to discover those type of things. And so just being able to drill down with a few simple mouse clicks to set a few filters and find conditions of interest, that's really the power of this. And in reality, also, anything that you can click on and set filters to look for conditions, there are tools out there, in addition to those provided with the commercial versions of the Elastic Stack. There's also things like ElastAlert and other type tools that you can actually use then to automate those searches and allow you to alert on those same conditions that you found in the UI by clicking around. So part of this with the reputation stuff, it's kind of interesting to me, because I oftentimes say that Elastiflow really dragged me into the security management space. There's a handful of use cases that flow data gets used for. Certainly the two most common are performance management and security management. And when I made Elastiflow, I thought really that probably everyone's going to be using this for performance management primarily. And I was quite surprised to find out that, just based on the interactions I've had with a pretty good segment of the community, that probably 2/3 of them are using it primarily for security, with performance management use cases being secondary. So and because of that, there's a lot of things I've started to develop in that direction of security management.
Yeah, I'd say that's true for myself. You being a user of this product, absolutely, it was a security focus first, and in fact, I also incorporated. I don't know if you're going to give a demo or talk about it at all, but also your Suricata dashboards that I absolutely love and base a lot of my own dashboards off of, because they're really functional. And I think that's one of the great things that you've done here is your dashboard should not just be a representation of data. It should be actionable. And the way I build mine, and I think this might key into something that you might talk about, but I build my dashboards by understanding the process first, and not the process of building the dashboards, the process of extracting the data I want to see. So how do I go about identifying that traffic? And then I build dashboards that allow me to get that 30,000 foot view, the 10,000 foot view, the 1,000 foot view, and the microscopic view. That allow me to sort of drill down maybe in 3 steps.
One of the other things you can do once you have, just a little bit of extra information. I tagged with that journal, with that IP reputation data that I had enriched all of the flow records with. And once you do that, you can also start to get a lot more different perspectives by just adding that one little piece of information. What the threat dashboards are really designed to do is to allow you to quickly identify at-risk systems based off of that any traffic with these external IPs that have a poor reputation. And so there's a few different categories that are set up here. For example, public threats. Public threats would be things that the client side of the connection, and we could have a long talk just about source destination versus client server. I think so many solutions, this would be my big critique on a lot of the stuff Elastic's been up to lately, is that all they do is source destination. They don't have this client server perspective on things. But a public threat would be the client side is a public IP, has a poor reputation, and it is reaching into or attempting to reach into my private assets. And so that's what we see here. And one of the things we can do, this is actually a little hint at a coming partnership for the future, is that we've recently started with this jump out to Risk IQ. So Risk IQ is a group that is a company that Elastiflow is entering into a formal relationship with around threat intelligence. So in the future, instead of myself actually going in and drilling or scraping the internet for various sources, we're going to have a much higher quality feed that is integrated with this next generation of Elastiflow that is about to surface, and we'll have direct integrations not only with from jumping into their dashboards but it's also going to include things like you being able to, if you've so enabled this, view analysis of your flow data in the Risk IQ user interface, as well as enrich your flow records with threat intelligence information from Risk IQ. So we're really excited about how that partnership could actually grow that entire use case. But nonetheless, even just within Elastiflow itself and the reputation information we have, obviously I just have a small environment, so I don't have a lot of high-risk clients or servers. But we leverage that information and our understanding of the directionality of traffic to help identify things that you might want to be concerned about.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really cool things that I've seen from your dashboards from Elastiflow is, I haven't seen all the products that are out there, but it's one of the ones that really has that directionality based on session instead of packet direction. And I think that's super, super helpful in understanding your own environment.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I think that perspective really gets lost in that, most flow record sources are unidirectional. So, the easiest example everyone understands is my web browser I make a request to a website. I'm the source. It's the destination. It sends me a response. It's the source. I'm the destination. And those are unidirectional because there's no guarantee that the path back is going to be the same path the original packet took, the request took. So, in general, flow records are always going to be a unidirectional representation. However, what I really care about in many cases is the fact that my browser is the client and the web server is the server. We might say, well, what does that matter to have that perspective? And think of something like a port scan. If I want to detect a port scan, I might have an algorithm that says something. And by the way, part of what the next generation of Elastiflow will do is provide, say you're a customer of Elastic and you have their commercial machine learning features. We've got about 36 machine learning jobs that we give you that you just import in, and it'll do some of this analytics for you. But one of them would be detecting like low and slow port scans. And one of the ways you do that is you do some anomaly detection where you would say, I'm looking at all of the client side connections, and I'm determining based off all of the different clients accessing a particular server, is there any one that's accessing an abnormally or unusually high number of ports? And you could look at that over longer periods of time to determine what the total number of ports is. Well, you might say, well, can't I do that with source destination? Well, no, you can't, because every time I try to make that connection, what's going to happen on the client side? Going to open up a different source port. So the answer back is going to be to a different destination port. Because the source port of the request was different. And that means if I'm only looking at source destination, I could get lots of false positives because the response could begin to look like a port scan because it's just responding to a lot of different open source ports. I hope that kind of made sense when I explained that. But so if I don't consider the client server relationship and only look at the source destination, there are a lot of security relevant detections that I'm not going to be able to do. And that's unfortunately what I see a lot in some of the other projects out there. And I really do apologize. I don't intend to attack anybody's work or what have you. I'm just trying to talk as a network guy. By not trying to bring in that client server context, a lot of these solutions are going to fall short of what they're trying to promise of being able to give you really detailed security relevant information.
I think that's a really important distinction. Yeah, I don't think I don't take that as like kind of being negative about other products, but your example that you just gave was critically important. The idea of, how do we tell that a particular client is accessing a particular server on a bunch of different ports over time? Your example is exactly right. When you switch that source destination relationship, it's really hard to tie that together. Whereas if you look at it from more of a connection oriented or a flow oriented look, the data is different, right? The data is different and more valuable. And so I completely get that. That's there. I do want to kind of give you a softball here. You keep mentioning about to come out or the version that's about to. So obviously the tool that we're seeing here is the current tool. It sounds like there's some changes on the horizon, right?
There are definitely changes on the horizon. You guys are getting the preview outside of a handful of customers and partners that know about this already. This is definitely the first that I've told anyone else about this. Elastiflow is actually starting next week. We will be out public, though our website's going to go live on Monday. And we're also going to announce the beta of the next generation of Elastiflow. So, the basis of building Elastiflow originally on the Elastic stack, I think, was sound at the time to explore the use cases. And Logstash was useful to learn and understand the things that were important in such a solution. However, Logstash has a lot of limitations, and in particular for flow. So, for example, it has no way to properly manage NetFlow v9 and IPFix templates. So the specs would say you need to manage templates per source IP, observation domain, session, and so and template ID, of course. And unfortunately, Logstash, in the way that it implements codecs, does not have all those pieces of information available to it at the time the data is processed by the codec. So one of the problems that a lot of users had is, I have like a Cisco ASA that's sending flow records to, and we'll just say flow set ID 256, right? 256. And then I have a Juniper that's also sending template 256, but their template's different than the other one. And depending whose template got there first, the other one's flows might be decoded by the wrong template. And basically you just end up with gobbledygook where it totally makes no sense whatsoever. And so that was one issue. Then there's various types of additional parsing and enrichment that I would have liked to have done that eventually just become really heavy inside of Logstash. I mean, it's a great flexible tool. I still think it's great for a lot of log processing use cases, but it was becoming a real limiting factor. And then you have the performance side of it. When I start to talk to organizations, I mean, telcos is the best example where you might have some core router at a telco that's literally spitting out just the one device, 150, 200,000 flows a second. Well, unfortunately, Logstash does not have the scalability to be able to handle those type of data rates. And so what was clear is that a complete rewrite from scratch was necessary. I went through every, I won't say every, but probably close to every repository or project related to Flow on GitHub. And in the end decided, I don't like any of these as a starting point. I'm just going to write my own from scratch, and started about 1.5 years ago. Unfortunately, I have to try to make a living in between bouts of developing. And so it's taken a while, but we are actually, and I'll show you a little bit of data and stuff here in a second, but this all new collector, written in Go, take advantage of concurrency. I would say that on a single server, the Logstash-based version of Elastiflow, even on really powerful servers, because it doesn't scale particularly well vertically, would probably top out around 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 flows a second on a single server. With the new collector on the box back here over my shoulder, 16 cores, 128 gig of RAM. I mean, it's not a terrible box. It's a pretty good box. I'm achieving on a single server, though, about 60,000 flows per second with the new solution. So, and we have plans for what we call our Extreme Scale Edition, where we'll take apart the different components of this new collector, wrap it around something like an Apache Kafka, and we have goals to hit 1 million flows a second. That's what we're targeting. So,
wow.
Oh, big boy numbers there. That's impressive. Yeah, that's very impressive. So you said, so this is, we're recording this on a Sunday. You said it's going to be live on a Monday. We're actually going to be showing it on a Wednesday. So by the time this comes out and hits the stream, your new site should be available, and the beta is going to be released.
The beta will be available. It will. So everyone, when they see this, you guys will all be able to go to the website. It's www.elastiflow.com. You want to talk about the stars coming together. When I first started to pull the business together, someone actually owned that domain, and had owned it for like 4 years. And about a month before I was ready to start formalizing everything, it expired. And so I was able to pick it up. I got really lucky. Fantastic. And so so elastiflow.com. Nice and simple. You will be able to do a few things there. There will be a link on there to sign up to the new community Slack. There will be some information about the new collector and the direction we're going. We are going to, there is going to be a commercial version. I know that's sometimes a sensitive issue, but the reality is Elastiflow has become more or less a full-time job, in addition to trying to make a living, right? I mean, right, no, so
you don't have to really apologize for that, man. No, I get it. Like, it's tough coming from open source, right? Like, the roots are open source and available to everybody. But at the end of the day, anything that has value takes time to produce. And so there's nothing wrong with having an edition. It's still going to remain open source, but you're just going to have an edition that's commercial.
So what we're going to do, it's going to be a mix. First off, there will always be a community version. Okay. That's where it all started. That's the thing that made it popular. There will always be a community version. There will be some limitations to it. And the primary difference is there'll be support on the commercial versions. And some of those high scale features we talk about will be in the commercial versions. They're just harder to support, require more time. And let's face it, if you're a big, huge telco making billions of dollars a year, I think you can afford to give me a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, for a tool that provides value, absolutely. Yeah, there's no shame in that. We're all going to make a living.
Yeah. And so the idea is the collector is going to be closed source, but the community version will be free of charge. However, all of the configuration artifacts, dashboards, alerting, machine learning jobs, all that we're going to continue to keep as open source on GitHub. So that we can, I hope that the community, I'd love the community to be contributing their own dashboards or their own alerts or different types of things, detection rules and that type of stuff. I would hope to kind of grow the community in that way. And we'll continue to support what we're starting to call now the legacy version. And I say we, because we also have a small team now built around this. So it won't just be all me.
I was going to bring that up. You've been saying we a lot, and yet we're only talking to one person. So I wanted to elaborate on that. So who is the we, and how does that come into Elastiflow?
I will first say, even when I was doing all the work, it's still we, because people in the community have questions, they have recommendations, they send me PCAPs so that I can add support. So I would argue that Elastiflow has always been a we. But nonetheless, there's a team that I have put together around this. We're still a small team, but we're approaching double figures. So it's not an insignificant team, especially important when you need to offer support in those type of things. And fortunately, a few partners that are supporting what we're doing, and a few customers already that are, behind us supporting what we're doing. So we're really lucky in that we have a great start. I oftentimes say there are people out there that have succeeded with far less. So I feel really blessed to be in the situation that it's in at the moment. So that's the direction it's going. And I feel like I'm hoping I'm going to do a good job of continuing to serve the community around the whole space of network management, but also being able to grow the solution and bring in other technologies, because I don't just want to be the flow guys. I really feel like when you look at the open source world as a whole, there is no good network is so ignored. I don't know what it is. I feel part of me wants to say, yeah, servers and apps are easy. Networks are hard. And I think what it is, though, is the variability. We have a lot more. There's a ton of network vendors. There's a handful of server vendors, and they all use a handful of operating systems, right? The problem is much smaller in scope. I did some work in my time at Sev1 on SNMP polling, and just for CPUs, I had over 180 different things that I polled across all the vendors that I did. I mean, shoot, even Cisco has like 6 different CPU metrics you can poll in SNMP, right? So the problem is far more diverse. And I get it, right? These vendors, they have a need to differentiate their products in the marketplace. So they develop they support the standards, the RFCs, the ITF, MIBs, and all that. And then they also support vendor-specific extensions for their secret sauce, right? And if you bought them for their secret sauce, you probably want to manage their secret sauce. And so, you want something that supports that. And I just don't feel that that the open source world overall, certainly in these newer platforms, really does a great job of that. Like SNMP polling, there's no great SNMP poller out there, period. I think Telegraph from Influx Data is probably the best one if I had to pick one, if I was forced to, but I don't think it's high enough performance to poll like at a telco, for example, or even a large distributed enterprise. I think there needs to be better solutions out there. SNMP traps. Oh yeah, there's a good half dozen solutions that parse SNMP traps into OID value pairs, right? But again, we come back to this thing of human beings. A human being doesn't want to see OID something has value 7. What they want to know is BGP peer, whatever, is down or unreachable. And they want to have something that's consumable. And so those are the types of areas we'd love to start investing our time in next, streaming telemetry and the like. And so that's some of our thoughts for the future and where we want to invest time and energy into.
So before we had jumped on this call, we had asked the Network Collective Slack, is there anything specifically that they wanted to know about Elastiflow? And there were a couple of questions came in. The one that I think that stood out to me was integration. And so you said that the tool is primarily being used as a security tool. At least you're finding that that's kind of the heavy use, not necessarily just from a networking perspective. And in the security world, there's a lot of like point tools that integrate with other tools. It's kind of the MO is how do you start integrating with other pieces? And so what does that look like from an Elastiflow perspective? And, is that something that you guys are considering about how to get data in and out, how to integrate with other pieces?
So let's see how to answer that. Probably the best way to describe where we see our role in the future is that I go back to the split of 3% data store, 7% analytics, 90% getting the data right. And it only makes sense if 90% of the work's getting the data right. That's where we can provide, 90% of the value. And we want to do that in a turnkey way, or as turnkey as possible. So what we want to do is we want to be the collector, for lack of a better word, of choice for all of your network telemetry data, be it flows, SNMP traps, model-driven telemetry from Cisco, et cetera, what have you. I don't know how much time and effort we're going to put into logs, maybe somewhere way out into the future. There's just so many people doing logs. I don't feel like we would, we could add more value more quickly focusing on the other sources. But being able to collect all of that network related telemetry and then allow you to put it in whichever data platform that you choose. Right now, as our history is around Elasticsearch, but we have, let me bring up one particular slide that maybe tells us a little bit better, right? I don't know if you could share that one.
Yeah,
I thought I'd bring it, right? The idea is you're going to have one thing that's bringing in all this telemetry, and it's doing all the work of parsing, formatting, normalizing, really important. I can show some examples here in a second from some data from the new collector. And then saying, look, wherever you want to put it in Elasticsearch, put it in Splunk. There's other data platforms. I really think ClickHouse actually has a lot of promise. And the Grafana team's also doing some really good work as well that, and using some of those technologies together, I think has a lot of promise, especially at bigger scales. And then just like we've done historically with Elastiflow by providing you dashboards and other things that you just import and instantly it's as if you're sitting in front of a purpose-built flow application. We want to do that for all of those other data sources for these other platforms as well. So it's not just about collecting the data, but also giving you what you need to instantly get the advantage of it in the platform you have. And that involves, though, taking advantage of a lot of the features that those different solutions. I mean, for example, both Splunk and Elasticsearch have their own machine learning engines. We want to provide you jobs out of the box that you just load into their engine, and it automatically works with our data. As an example. And so those are the type of ways we think about integrating with other systems is by being primarily a data source, but also helping provide the other artifacts necessary to instantly take advantage of the data. Is that kind of what you think the question is?
Yeah, that was the question. I think that ultimately the question is, no one has a single tool and no single tool is going to handle it all. And so the question is, where does this fit into the ecosystem of tools that we have, within our network? How can we make sure that that we're not having to collect the data 7 different places and have it processed uniquely? You mentioned that you want to be the collector of choice and then spread that data around, and that's where you want to fit in the network, and that makes sense. We're kind of coming up towards the back end here. You said you wanted to show us a couple of things from the beta release that's coming. We should probably should get to that if you want to demo a bit here.
Sure. So I don't we're literally in the middle of building out new dashboards. One of the things we've done is actually modified the schema that we're using, and so that's going to mean we're going to have to remake a lot of the dashboards and all that type of stuff. Schemas are something that I feel is really important. This kind of comes back to the telemetry conversation as well, and being able to take different sources. What I don't think that users want is I don't think users want to have one screen they look at for Cisco, another screen they look at for Juniper, another they look at for Fortinet, for example.
I'd agree with that.
I think they want one screen that has everything. And so in order to do that, you do need to normalize the data. Now, the new collector is going to support on day one over 6,000 different information elements. So part of the reason this collector has taken so long is to normalize 6,000 different information elements is just a big bunch of work to sit down and figure out which ones have the same type of data or close enough that I could transform it and turn one into the other and those type of things. And so, but I wanted to share a little bit about just looking at the raw data. There's already plenty of things that you can see. Here's some records that are from the Cisco SD-WAN solutions. And one of the things that you see already in these records, and again, this comes back to things that were impossible with Logstash. Logstash had no clue of what's called option templates. So in Flow, devices that support Flow can send option templates, which are basically like a dictionary of metadata about the other information they're going to send you. And so they don't want to send all the detail with every single record. That's not very efficient. So they send, for example, in this case, you get a bunch of different application attributes that are all really related to this application ID. So Cisco sends most of this information in option templates ahead of time. And then when you get the raw data, you can match it up to those templates. This is something we can handle very well in the new collector that was impossible before with Logstash. So we're already increasing the richness of the information that we can provide that simply was not possible previously. And then I mentioned the different vendor support as well. So, like in addition to Cisco, you can see this data here came from VeloCloud. Some of the VeloCloud, when you see us call out fields separately for a particular vendor, that's kind of a little bit more the direction of their secret sauce, where we can, we do try to normalize things into this, into our schema that we have. While I mentioned schema, I didn't think to bring this window up, but when I mention schema, let me jump over to my GitHub real quick. There is a repository. It's still a bit of a work in progress, but it's kind of something near and dear to my heart. And I'm even starting to talk to a few other organizations about maybe jumping on board here. But it's kind of an approach to some real world schemas. I mean, there's like 101 schemas out there, right? And unfortunately, a lot of them are very specific to certain solutions, or, and I know this is going to sound kind of critical, but, I'll say it anyway. You get 20 PhDs in a room and they think about theoretically what the perfect schema should look like. And then they come out of the room and everyone goes, yeah, but this doesn't look anything like the real world, right? So
yeah,
I like
never
to
experienced that before in networking. Yeah, absolutely.
So I like to call this a real world schema, and where I've begun to document out things for different data types related to networks, network traffic, and even then, in addition to documentation, you want your data stream to be consumable. So you take that same stuff and you produce like JSON schema documents so that other applications that understand JSON schema can then easily then ingest your data. Maybe in the future we'll do things like Avro schemas and other type protobuf or those type of things. But yeah, the idea is to make the data as consumable as possible by other applications. And then you kind of start to get into some of these other data sources. I'll jump down here to the end, I think it was. Yeah. So this particular record, actually, Calyx is a kind of an interesting company. So Calyx makes gigabit passive optical network equipment, and some of their latest generation of equipment, they no longer support SNMP. They only stream telemetry metrics using IPFix. And it's essentially the same stuff you would get like out of an SNMP interfaces table. And so we have a schema where we've normalized that data to. And so we can build dashboards and stuff beyond just flows, also for metrics and metric related data. And at the same time, if you take, for example, SNMP, or I'm sorry, S-Flow has had countersamples for a while. Now, the old legacy Elastiflow solution did not support countersamples at all. The new one will. In fact, all of the known that I've found documented countersamples anywhere on the internet, really, are supported in our new collector and also normalized to the same structure. So if you look at these fields, you get the exact same field names, the exact same data semantics as we had over here with this IPFix data from Calyx, but this is coming from S-Flow from my Juniper box. Now, I could also maybe do some SNMP polling as well and end up in the same schema. And now it really doesn't matter where the data originated from. For the user, they're going to have what they need to be able to just understand the current performance state of whatever device they're looking at without really caring what was the technology that originally transported that data to the solution. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about in the way we want to make data easily consumable for humans. But also, if you think about from an analytics standpoint, right, if I wanted to have, say, some type of anomaly detection, maybe machine learning based or just statistical analysis based thing that's detecting unusually high or low network traffic for a particular server or service, I can now do that. I can have one job that does that task that works across my entire data set instead of having to have 20 jobs that I have to maintain and what have you. So again, it comes down to put the work in the data ahead of time to make all of the other things you want to do with it and the value you want to extract out of it as simple as possible. So that's just a couple of examples of what the new collector is up to. So it's a lot more stuff we're digging out. I was trying to see if there was any other quick thing that might be particularly, sometimes as a network and data guy, I kind of geek out a little bit on the metrics and stuff. Things like option tags that weren't handled before and all kinds of little small details that should at some point add value into the overall value to the data set overall.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, like you said, it was, normalizing. It's great for a human to be able to see across it, but I can also see how it's really powerful for a machine to not deal with different data types or to deal with disparate data types. It's always been a challenge. You're going to have to write one thing for one piece and one thing for another and bringing that data together. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a bit skeptical only because of the fact that that's a pretty Herculean task. And so I hope you get it. I hope you get it settled well. I mean, I'm interested to try it out now to see what it all looks like and feels like, because many attempts have been made to do this before. I won't necessarily say from the flow perspective though. So for data collection perspective, I see a lot of trying to normalize network configuration, a lot of attempt to normalize, different components of interacting with your network. I'm interested to see how this plays out on the data side because of the fact that maybe there's a bit more control there than trying to do configuration or trying to do things live and on the systems. So we'll see. I look at that and I go, yes, that's what we need. But then I also go, yes, we've seen people try this before, and so please excuse my skepticism. I want to see it in action. Yes,
I'm totally with you. I would also, I probably would count myself to some degree among the skeptics in a way.
Right.
I think though is at some point you have to draw a line between what adds value, right? Or where should I invest my time to add the most value most effectively, as opposed to, trying to boil the ocean. I actually have a methodology when I approach any schema or any of these data sets. I call it, C squared, or C cubed rather. So C3, which is, there's 3 C's. There's what I call core, common, and custom. And so core, the easiest way to understand it is you think of CPUs, right? CPU utilization is to me a core metric.
Right.
Almost 98% of all devices are going to either give it to you directly or provide you the other metrics that you can use to calculate it.
Right.
Then you have things that are a little bit more, we'll say common, things like I/O wait time and some of those other CPU metrics that are pretty common. It's certainly worth coming up with a normalized naming convention for them, but we might not provide a lot of analytics out of the box for them because they're not going to be as widely applicable. And then you have these custom things or these really rare things like context switches per second and processor queue lengths. And it's like there's no reason we're not even going to waste time. We'll just let those stay vendor specific. And, we can always create vendor specific dashboards and alerts. And if people need that, right. But really invest your time on those things that are going to have the most impact. That's
not as part of the core product. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, I think it's about Oh, go ahead, Tony. Yes,
I just wanted to jump in and say, you know, what you were just describing about normalizing all the data and from data sources. I mean, I think you saw my last week's stream when I was giving a short demonstration on Graylog, and kind of like what you were just describing here is like speaking to my heart and also making me feel like this big, because I too started realizing in order to consume all of these data sources and make sense of it all, I have to normalize all that data, whether it's coming from Sysmon or my router's NetFlow, or if I'm pulling flow out of Zeek or Bro or Suricata, right? I need to be able to normalize all that to make sense of it. And I found myself just sort of doing it, every single one of them custom. And I found out that wasn't working. So I actually went to GitHub in a private repository and started writing down all of the fields that I find common across my different data sources and normalizing them. And then now see your repository and all of the protocols that you have listed and all of the normalization that you've already done. I kind of feel like, why am I bothering with my effort? I just need to jump on this bandwagon here. But I definitely know that sort of painstaking process of normalizing the data in a way that also sort of makes it future-proof. All right, that means that you can bring in new tools and new sources of data and not have to go back and change what you've already done. Because when you start changing those keys in existing data, it's no longer searchable, right? The metrics no longer add up anymore because now they're looking at two different keys. So I definitely see what you guys are doing. I see the real value in putting all the work in the data up front. So that makes analytics and machine learning easier on the back end. That's super cool. Very cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that repository, by the way, is public. And that's kind of, if I had my dream, it is that we'll have a whole community around that. In fact, it's called Codex, Community for Open Data and Event Exchange. I want all of these platforms to be able to talk to each other in a really simple way and exchange information, right? And so, I'd love for, if you're passionate about those things, I'd love for you to get in there and pick apart my stuff and tell me how some of it stinks. And, because I know I don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And
very cool.
I'm more than willing to have people tell me where my stuff stinks, because that's where I learned from it too. So
we're all on that path. So Rob, thank you so much for taking the time to come and show us about Elastiflow. Excited to see the new stuff that's coming out of it, and exciting to see the project become a bit more formalized, right? You establish the company, you're going to a beta and a new platform as well, complete, rewrite. So that's exciting. That's new stuff. So thanks for coming on and sharing with us about that. Just want to point people in the right direction, right? Your Twitter handles there on the screen, Rob Cowart _.com, or not _.com. So people can find you there, and I imagine you will, engage in conversation around this there. You said elastiflow.com, which should be live. Yeah. And then the new beta.
Twitter. Yeah.
Yep. And then
Twitter. Yep.
At Elastiflow on Twitter, and then just that last project you were talking about, the Codex on GitHub. And so if you're interested in normalizing network data and feel like you can make some contributions, go to GitHub, check out Codex, and get involved. I'm pointing at you, Tony. Yeah, just like you're pointing at yourself.
I know.
All right. Well, thanks again, Rob. And hopefully we'll have you on sometime in the future, and we'll talk about what's next.
I just want to say thanks for having me. And, I discovered you guys recently sort of on Twitter, by chance, and watched a couple of the videos. I just want to say I think you guys are doing a great service for the community around networking and stuff. And I've heard you say a couple of times about just starting out, but I think you guys are doing a great job already. So,
all right.
Thanks,
Rob.
Congrats. Yep.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thank you.